Gun control is a band-aid solution to the problem of mass shootings. In fact, mass shootings probably aren't even near as big of a problem as the media portrays it as. What's more is that even if gun control might reduce mass shootings, which I doubt, doing so is a band-aid solution that is a completely disingenuous way to sweep the real problems under the rug. What's up, guys? Acer Thorn here, and this is Purple Politics. When it comes to mass shootings, and especially school shootings, both the Democrats and Republicans agree that it is a problem that needs to be stamped out forthwith. What exactly they should do to fix the problem, however, is a debate that has completely polarized the nation. Liberals believe that the presence of guns and the availability of acquiring them is the primary reason why mass shootings are on the rise. Conservatives argue that this is a problem with the people wielding the firearms, not the firearms themselves. As the old saying goes, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Liberals would naturally fire back by saying, yeah, people kill people. With guns. Now, before I discuss the issues that you were expecting to hear about when you saw the title of this video, I feel it's important we get the facts straight. This is one issue where both Democrats and Republicans are wrong about one thing. Why are mass shootings on the rise in this country? They're not. They only appear to be on the rise because the media is disproportionately focusing on the shootings because they draw ratings. One of the biggest problems with tracking mass shooting statistics is the lack of a consistent definition of what even qualifies as a mass shooting. Take this chart, for example. This chart tracks the number of mass shootings per year. From the looks of it, it appears that there's a sudden spike in mass shootings around 2013-ish, and that sudden surge of mass shootings hasn't dropped off yet. At first glance, this doesn't look good, but really, look more closely. According to the supplementary notes, they claim to use the FBI's definition of what counts as a mass shooting, which at first glance sounds like a good standard to use. However, in 2013, the FBI changed the definition of mass shooting so that it required 3 or more fatalities. Before 2013, the definition of a mass shooting required 4 or more fatalities. Oh gee, we got a spike in mass shootings immediately following the FBI changing the definition to make it easier for an incident to qualify as a mass shooting. What a coinky-dink. This problem only gets further exacerbated when we start looking at statistics that use definitions of mass shootings that are entirely arbitrary, rather than using the definitions set by the FBI or some other recognized authority on the issue. When private companies start keeping track of these sorts of statistics, they're allowed, under the First Amendment, to use whatever definition they want. To that end, a lot of stats that the media uses to report on the spike in mass shootings will use exceptionally lenient definitions. Some of them don't even require any fatalities for an incident to be classified as a mass shooting. As long as there were 2 or more people injured, not just killed, they will consider that to be a mass shooting and use that to artificially inflate the statistics. Hell, some of them don't even tell us what their definition is in the first place, meaning they could conceivably just pull some random number out of their ass, and we'll never be able to prove that it was made up. Now, I don't know about you, but for me personally, the inability to get reliable data makes me question the authenticity, honesty, and integrity of a lot of these fear-mongering reports. It honestly feels like they're deliberately trying to crank the numbers up as high as they can possibly get away with, just to increase ratings and make people scared and stupid. In other words, it's blatant yellow journalism. Now, that being said, why don't we instead take a look at the per capita rate of gun deaths and the per capita rate of intentional homicides regardless of weapon type? Unlike mass shootings, these stats have a fairly standard bright line definition, so the stats are much harder to manipulate. It is important that we focus on per capita statistics here because, yes, the USA might be the second in the world in terms of gun deaths, sure, but that's only because we're the third largest country in the world. Of course we're going to have a much larger flat number of gun deaths compared to the rest of the world. We're going to have a much larger flat number of nearly everything compared to the rest of the world. By contrast, looking at per capita statistics actually takes population size into account, and so it puts all the countries on a much more level playing field. If you look at the top 10 countries in the world in terms of per capita gun-related deaths, the mainland United States, not counting non-state territories, isn't even in the top 10 list at all. Hell, even the territories of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands appear to only be in the top 10 because of their association with Latin America, not because of their association with the United States. Also, if you take weapon type out of the equation completely and look only at the number of per capita intentional homicides, then according to the World Bank, the United States actually ranks 49th in the world in terms of per capita intentional homicides. 49th, people. Oh, and if you look at the worldwide stats from that same World Bank source, you'll find that per capita intentional homicides have actually been steadily on the decline ever since the turn of the 21st century, once again affirming that murders, and mass shootings in particular, aren't nearly as big of a problem as the media makes it out to be. Now sure, there are a lot of countries that have significantly lower per capita homicides than the United States. For example, China allegedly only has 1 murder per 100,000 residents. But I'm sure every American watching this video right now will agree that the levels of totalitarianism they have to enforce in order to get to that point simply are not worth it. Put simply, mass shootings are not nearly the crisis or epidemic that the mainstream media currently portrays them as. It's blatant yellow journalism. It relies on manipulating statistics, manipulating definitions, and in extreme cases, even outright lying. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that there really is an epidemic of mass shootings in this country. After all, just because it isn't as big of a problem as they make it out to be, doesn't mean it isn't a problem at all. All murders are tragic, unless the victim is rich, and even one mass shooting is honestly one too many. So that begs the question, how do we fix this? Liberals say that the quickest and easiest way to solve the problem of mass shootings is to impose stricter gun control laws. However, we must keep in mind that, for better or worse, the right to bear arms is a constitutional right. Governments can restrict people's right to carry a concealed weapon. They can forbid people with criminal records from owning guns. They can require registration and documentation out the ass for whenever a gun is bought or sold. But the simple act of owning a gun in the first instance, in any capacity, sorry, but the government cannot stop you from doing that. And whether liberals like it or not, that is a constitutional right. For better or worse, it would take a constitutional amendment to change that. And whether you like it or not, we simply don't have the Democratic support for such a measure. In fact, only 20% of Americans support repealing the Second Amendment. That isn't even a simple majority, let alone the 3/4 necessary to enact a constitutional amendment. In fact, it's literally the complete opposite. there's enough Democratic support in favor of keeping the Second Amendment that it could support an amendment reaffirming the right to bear arms. Now, to be fair, the Second Amendment doesn't give you a constitutional right to exceptionally powerful weapons. Fully automatic assault rifles and armor-piercing ammunition are not protected under the Second Amendment. But frankly, if you think banning only those guns is going to solve the mass shooter crisis, what little of a crisis there is, see earlier in the video for details, then you honestly haven't taken one single solitary look at the facts. The majority of mass shootings in the United States, what few there were done with handguns. Assault rifles and shotguns collectively only amount to 40% of mass shootings, and most liberals aren't even looking to ban shotguns, only assault rifles. Now, combine that with the fact that, as we've already established, mass shootings aren't nearly as common as the media makes them out to be, and that means that banning assault rifles only will have a nominal effect on an already nominal problem. Frankly, even if it isn't unconstitutional per se, I don't see such a small benefit as a compelling reason to waste precious political capital enacting this policy when that political capital could be much better spent enacting policies that actually matter. Policies like, addressing the actual cause behind mass shootings. This, of course, begs the question, why do mass shootings occur? Are they literally just looking for attention? Well, if they are going about it in the worst way possible. I'd honestly be far more willing to believe that people are fully transitioning into the opposite sex, complete with hormones and cutting off their dicks, just for a shot at getting a peek at some ladies taking a piss, rather than simply finding porn on the internet, before you'll convince me that mass shooters are giving up their entire lives just for their 15 minutes of fame. No, actually, there have been studies done as to why mass shooters go on mass shooting sprees, and the answer is, quite honestly, about what any level-headed person would expect. Mass shooters overwhelmingly fit into one profile: mentally ill patients who have endured widespread domestic violence at home and widespread bullying at school. That's literally it. So this begs the question, why aren't we cracking down on domestic violence and bullying? And why aren't we offering aid to mentally ill people? Not only is this directly tied to mass shootings, but it's also morally abhorrent behavior in its own right. I honestly don't see what's so complicated about this. For the sake of argument, let's assume that doing these things won't actually bring down mass shootings. What, are you saying we shouldn't stamp out bullying where we find it? That we shouldn't offer aid to people with mental illnesses? Shouldn't we be doing that stuff any damn way? Of course, anti-bullying campaigns are notoriously ineffective in recent years, but that's mostly because they tend to amount to little more than an endless seminars explaining why bullying is wrong. Of course, everyone knows it's wrong, even the bullies themselves know it's wrong. What we really need to do is actually stamp it out, as in by force. We need to put the bullies in their place. We need to make the bullies eat shit. We need to make them feel just as hopeless as their victims. People will bully each other less if they're scared to be bullied. They'll bully each other less if bullying is bad for their health. In fact, when you look at it from that angle, you quickly start to realize that gun control is far from the solution to the problem of mass shootings. If anything, it is a band-aid solution to the problem of mass shootings. Gun control, in this case, is basically the equivalent to unpleasant design. What's unpleasant design, you ask? Well, when it's applied to city planning, it's also known as hostile architecture. You've probably heard of that. It basically means you set up your public spaces, sidewalks, park benches, etc., in such a way it is extremely difficult for homeless people to exist in these highly visible spaces. For example, in 2018, the city of Seattle put some bike racks underneath a bridge, despite it being incomprehensible that bicyclists would actually want to park their bikes there. But the bike racks weren't put there for bicyclists. They were put there so that homeless people couldn't sleep there. You've ever seen a park bench with one of those arbitrary armrests right in the center for no apparent reason? That's there so that hobos can't lay down and sleep on that bench like a couch. Unpleasant design is especially insidious because it's very easy to hide the true intentions behind the design. Unless you know what to look for, these minor flourishes might seem relatively harmless when taken out of context. But in practice, they force homeless people into less visible spaces in the city. This means that the city councils aren't under as much pressure from their constituents to do something about the homelessness problem because the people aren't complaining about it as much. They aren't complaining about it because they don't typically see the homeless in their daily lives anymore. But they aren't not seeing the homeless because the number of homeless people has genuinely decreased. They're not seeing the homeless because unpleasant design has, quite literally, swept the problem under the rug. I bring up all of that to say this. When Democrats demand gun control as a response to mass shootings, first of all, it's not likely going to be very effective unless we ban all guns, for reasons I've already discussed. But even barring that, it's honestly the equivalent of unpleasant design. Even if we assume that gun control will result in fewer mass shootings, that just seems like an excuse for Democrats to continue to ignore the bullying, domestic violence, and mental health issues that are causing these mass shootings in the first place. To put this in perspective for you, imagine if an asylum were to determine that a person was a danger to himself or others, and so they put him in a straitjacket, as you do. But instead of taking any steps to actually treat his mental illness, you just leave him in the straitjacket, indefinitely. That's basically what Democrats are trying to do with gun control and the mass shooting non-epidemic. The bullying, the domestic violence, the mental health, all of that may still be there. But just like with the homeless, Democrats won't be under as much pressure to fix these problems as long as we, the majority, don't see these problems manifest in the form of mass shootings. But that is simply disingenuous, and it should be called out as such. So there you have it. Mass shootings aren't even really the epidemic the media currently portrays them as, but even if it was, gun control simply is not the solution. For better or worse, the right to bear arms is a constitutional right, and for that matter, gun control simply sweeps the real problems under the rug. If we crack down on domestic violence at home and bullying at schools, which we ought to be doing anyway, and if we provide proper aid to those with mental illnesses, which we ought to be doing anyway, there is no reason to believe that mass shootings won't go down significantly. But even if the non-problem of mass shootings isn't resolved by that, it would still provide a great service to the public just by stamping out these already evil behaviors any damn way. So unless somebody can provide a genuinely compelling reason why we shouldn't be stamping out that crap for its own sake, independent of the mass shooting crisis, then by all means, post a comment down below. But in the meantime, I am Acer Thorn, and this has been Purple Politics.